Before humans even set foot on Earth, elves had established empires that ruled continents, wiped out entire enemy species without leaving a trace, challenged gods themselves, and nearly perished on their way to godhood. Elves who discovered nature spirits understood the semi-conscious states of these beings and managed to train them through a process similar to what humans do with wolves. These spirits, able to understand simple commands in the Elvish language, became the elves' closest companions and their greatest weapon with their elemental powers. Not wanting their control over these beings to be replicated by other species, the elves forbade the use of their previously shared language and developed a new common language for themselves. Elves, after much effort, manage to enchant their language. When they speak, what they say can only be heard by the person they are speaking to, and as long as they are in the same biome, the distance between them is irrelevant. Third parties near the elf hear their words as meaningless utterances thanks to the enchantment. The elves devised a socially based method to prevent other races from learning and using their old language. Aware that they couldn't directly suppress the spread of their language through violence, they declared that anyone who knew the language, regardless of their race, would be considered an elf, welcomed as an elf in elf lands, and able to enjoy the privileges offered among elves as if they were one. However, they emphasized that if anyone taught the language to a non-elf, both the teacher and the student would be excommunicated from the Elven Brotherhood and condemned by all those considered elves, regardless of their relations. Furthermore, they often sent assassins after such individuals to scare others who might think making the same mistake. The Elf Empire, which has taken the nature spirits under its control and has become almost unstoppable, found new gods to answer their prayers when their own gods could not provide them with what they were looking for. They found distant, forgotten, buried gods. They tried to turn themselves into gods by using these powers that they did not yet understand, and they came very close to their goals, although not as much as they wanted. They have achieved something akin to immortality, but as consequence have also initiated a level of individualization never before seen in history. Elves, who were previously aware of their mortality, passed on their knowledge and crafts to future generations and aimed to raise the legends of the future. Each new generation builds upon the knowledge of previous generations, reaching heights that no one could achieve alone. But the elves, who have extended their lives with these changes, no longer had such problems. Elves, who now lived long enough to build upon their own knowledge, preferred to master their craft on their own, not aimed at raising the legends of tomorrow, but becoming legends themselves. They often refused to raise new generations who might steal their jobs or fame. As the bonds between the elves weaken, they cease helping one another. It's not just the people who lose interest. When the rulers begin to live only for themselves, the people become indifferent to the kingdom they built with their own hands. With warriors doing the same, the elves, who produced history's greatest threats and heroes, couldn't even form a regular army to protect themselves from external threats. They were no longer dying of old age, but still death were claiming more each day than ever before. As the elves who made their mark on history are buried one by one in mass graves, along with their stories and accumulated knowledge, the secrets of the past become the subject of today's research, and all their accumulated knowledge begins to be lost. In this society where everyone lived and died for themselves, something is finally realized, albeit too late. The elves' bodies have adapted to their long lifespans over the centuries, and they could no longer reproduce as frequently as before, and the situation was getting worse. It's not just their lifespans that the elves changed on their path to godhood. Their senses also developed to extreme levels, and their emotions evolved accordingly. Everything tasted and smelled sharper. Everything they touched told a more detailed story. They saw more than they desired, and every sound got lost in another distant noise. Along with these developments, the elves' emotions also grow. As they attain more, they become dissatisfied with less. They give more to obtain more, take greater risks, and care less. It's as if nature is forcing them to adapt to its ways again. Elves, who extend their lifespans to thousands of years, still manage to die within a few centuries. They develop drugs to bring their heightened senses and emotions under control. However, the problems with this quick solution quickly became apparent. The elves began to become addicted to these drugs. Initially banned, the drugs were later distributed and produced in a less potent and more controlled manner. Changes wasn't just physical. After their rise, they stopped drawing most things and generally focused on self-portraits. Self-discovery and realizing one's potential became central themes in art, religion, and philosophy. While the inclination towards art increased, the number of craftsmen also decreased considerably. Although elves produce the most flawless examples of craftsmanship, their production capabilities have become quite limited. Their inability to even approach the required quantities has led to a significant decline in their internal operations, and they have suffered an economic blow as they are able to accept fewer outside orders in the market that the guild is trying to globalize. Elves with heightened senses and emotions struggled to cope with depression and pessimism during this period, becoming even more dependent on drugs to soothe their feelings. However, since there wasn't even enough drug production to meet the increased demand, many elves committed suicide during this time. The elves, who already had biological difficulties reproducing, lost their desire to have children during this period, leading to an incredible decline in their population and making the collapse of their empire unstoppable. Elves who used drugs, deemed inadequate for any work due to their impaired senses within an elf society with incredibly high standards, are ostracized from society and the economy. As their empires struggle to cope with declining populations, they become a burden to their own kingdoms and citizens, leading to rebellions and uprisings among the disgruntled population. When the labor shortage reached its peak, the elves were forced to accept the craftsmanship of other races they considered inferior. Were still trying to come to terms with the blow to their pride when it soon became clear that they could not continue doing so due to their rapidly declining economy. While it wasn't easy to instill in the elves, who had previously left slavery behind, the idea that races inferior to themselves should serve them, the elves, struggling to accept the sudden decline in their quality of life, suddenly engaged in a war of enslavement, but failed to grasp the seriousness of their predicament and suffered enormous losses. Internal conflicts, both among the generals themselves and between the people and the rulers, paved the way for the end of their imperial era. The Elven Empire loses its former unity as officials responsible for governing the city cause rebellions that sometimes escalate into civil wars due to their self-serving actions. Beside that, other problems, such as skilled workers retreating to hone their crafts and trade becoming increasingly difficult, result in city life losing its meaning, leading to migration from the city to the countryside. Without urbanization, tribalism begins. Elves voluntarily abandon the once impenetrable walls of their kingdoms. Drawn to regions where nature spirits are purest, and thanks to their affinity for elemental magic, they attempt to bind themselves to these now sacred places. Elves soon undergo a new transformation. In most elf tribes, anatomical changes occur that reflect their environment, as seen in the old elf priests. Elves who manage to emerge from the ruins of their kingdom seek ways to return to their former glory. Some elf kingdoms resort to magic to regain their numbers, leading to situations like the Drow. Others hide as tribes, waiting for their numbers to increase naturally. Some of them even abandon their sense of racial purity and just copulate with other suitable species. The unnecessary nobles of the Elven Kingdom forbids elven women from mating with men of other species. Every century, they demand that female elves return to their homeland and give birth to elven babies. While almost all female elves obey this rule, no such restriction applies to male elves. Although they generally view other races as inferior, a not-so-small number of elves engage in relationships with companions in their adventure groups, and most half-elves originate from this.